Hello, Capricorn. My name is Henry, and thank you for spending a little bit of your time here with me. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any future readings. And if there's anything you'd like me to pray over, send positive energy toward, or simply hold space for, feel free to let me know in the comments. As always, this is a collective tarot reading, so take what resonates with your journey and gently leave behind anything that doesn't. I'm simply the messenger here. The most important voice in this reading is still your own intuition. So as these cards come through, allow yourself to listen to what your inner knowing may be trying to show you. And Capricorn, the very first card showing up here is the Judgment card. Wow. What's interesting here is, I don't actually feel like this is the energy of someone trying to forget something. Honestly, it feels more like the energy of someone who's starting to remember. And those are two very different things. Because sometimes we think time is supposed to make things fade. But with this person, time seems to be doing the exact opposite. It's making them look back. It's making them think more deeply. And it's bringing certain things into focus that may have once been overlooked. I feel like someone has been spending a lot of time in their own thoughts. Probably more than Capricorn realizes. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're sitting around thinking about you all day long. But it does feel like you show up in the quiet spaces of their life. In the middle of a workday, during a drive, right after they put their phone down, or when a room suddenly feels quieter than usual. And what I keep seeing here is that they're not just remembering you. They're remembering who they were when they were around you. And honestly, that's the important part. Because sometimes we don't miss someone simply because of who they are. We miss the version of ourselves that existed when they were in our life. And I feel like this person is starting to realize that. The Nine of Swords card comes through with the feeling of a mind that never seems to fully settle. Thoughts keep resurfacing. Conversations they wish had gone differently. Questions they wish they had asked. Things they wish they had said. And you know what's interesting? I don't see a lot of anger here. I see regret. A very quiet kind of regret. Not dramatic, not explosive. The kind that shows up unexpectedly when you least expect it. For some of you, this person genuinely believed they had more time. That everything would still be there. That this connection wasn't going anywhere, that you would always occupy the same place in their life. But then something shifted. Maybe it was distance, maybe it was silence. Or maybe life simply carried both of you in different directions. And somehow, that space between you gave them a clearer view of everything. I keep hearing the same message over and over again. I wish I had understood this sooner. Not because they suddenly discovered how amazing you are. I honestly think they knew that a long time ago. The difference is, they didn't fully understand how important it was. And those are not the same thing. It feels like there were certain things they started taking for granted. Your presence, your patience, your consistency. The way you always tried to keep things calm, even when you were carrying your own pressure. For many Capricorns listening to this, I feel like you're not the type of person who walks into a room demanding attention. You don't need to. Your value tends to reveal itself over time. People notice it after they've had a chance to observe you. After they've experienced you. And unfortunately, sometimes people don't fully understand that value until distance enters the picture. The Strength card carries a really powerful energy here, because I don't think this person is simply seeing your strength. I think they're seeing it differently now. Maybe at one point they thought you were strong because you didn't react. But now they're beginning to understand that your strength came from choosing calm in situations where many other people would have lost control. They're beginning to understand that your composure wasn't indifference. Your maturity wasn't emotional detachment. Your silence didn't mean you didn't care. Wow, that's a very different realization. Because the more they look back, the more they seem to notice all the little things they missed before. The small details, the small moments, the subtle signals. Things that once felt ordinary suddenly carry meaning. I also feel like this person is going through a period of questioning themselves. Not to punish themselves forever. Not to stay stuck in guilt, but to understand. To understand why they responded the way they did. Why they stayed silent. Why they failed to recognize something that may have been right in front of them. And whenever the Judgment card comes through, I often feel like it's the moment when someone begins hearing the truth inside themselves, without all the outside noise, without the familiar excuses, without the stories they've been telling themselves for years. Just the truth. And sometimes the truth is surprisingly simple. That someone carried more value than they realized. That a connection meant more than they were willing to admit. and that certain things in life can only be understood when we become quiet enough to truly look back. I honestly feel like this is only the beginning of that realization. Because once someone starts seeing things through a different lens, the emotions they've been trying to set aside often aren't very far behind. I think what's coming through very clearly here is that this person didn't pull away because they felt nothing. If anything, it feels like they pulled away because they felt too much. And I know that sounds contradictory. But sometimes people don't run from the things they don't care about. They run from the things that make them feel like they're losing control. And honestly, that's exactly what I feel coming through with the Moon card. There was something about this connection that couldn't be explained through logic alone. Maybe in the beginning they thought it would be simple. Maybe they thought this was just another meeting, another relationship, another connection that would unfold the same way others had before. But then the feelings started going deeper than they expected, and that's when the anxiety began. For some of you, this person may be the kind of individual who likes to understand everything before taking the next step. They like having answers. They like knowing where they stand. They like seeing the road ahead. But what's interesting is that emotions rarely work that way. You can't plan feelings the same way you plan a career. You can't manage your heart the same way you manage your schedule. And I feel like that's exactly what threw them off balance. There came a moment when they realized they cared more than they intended to. They started hoping for more, thinking more, paying more attention. And instead of feeling relieved by that realization, they became nervous. Because the more they cared, the more they realized what they could potentially lose. And when the fear of loss appears before something has even fully begun, a lot of people instinctively create distance. Not because they don't want to get closer, but because distance feels safer. I keep seeing the image of someone standing in front of an open door. They know that if they walk through it, they'll have to be honest. They'll have to let someone see the parts of themselves they usually keep hidden. They'll have to acknowledge things they've spent years trying to control. And that hesitation, that's what I keep feeling here. The Four of Cups card carries the energy of someone sitting very close to something they need, yet struggling to fully receive it. Not because they can't see the value, but because their mind is tangled up in other fears. What's interesting here is, I don't think this person was only afraid of losing you. I think they were afraid of losing the version of themselves they had carefully built over time. Because sometimes love asks us to face the very things we've spent years avoiding. Old wounds, old insecurities. Old stories we've been telling ourselves for far too long. Maybe this is someone who was used to being in control. Maybe they were always the one deciding when to move forward and when to step back. But the energy here feels different. The harder they tried to control their emotions, the stronger those emotions became. The harder they tried not to think about something, the more it occupied their mind. The harder they tried to create distance, the more aware they became of the emptiness that distance created. And then the Eight of Cups card appears. And honestly, I don't see someone walking away because they stopped caring. I see someone walking away while still carrying a great deal of unresolved emotion. They may have believed that if they stepped back, things would become easier. If they focused on something else, the feelings would settle down. If they created enough space, their mind would finally become quiet. But it doesn't seem like it worked that way. Because sometimes the things we try to leave behind simply follow us in different forms. A song suddenly playing somewhere. A familiar road. A certain scent. A quiet moment at the end of the day. And all at once, the things they thought they had placed neatly on a shelf somewhere come rushing back into awareness. I also feel a layer of self-reflection here. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quietly present beneath the surface. Like someone wondering if they handled things the right way. Wondering if they've allowed fear to lead for too long. Wondering if they missed something meaningful simply because they weren't ready to face what they truly felt. And once those questions begin showing up, everything tends to become much more complicated. Because at that point, the story stops being only about a connection. It starts becoming a journey of understanding oneself. And honestly, I feel like that's where this energy is leading. Because behind all of this silence, it feels like there are still deeper truths this person hasn't fully faced yet. I think one thing that's coming through very clearly here is that there are parts of the story Capricorn may have never fully known. Because when I look at this energy, I don't see someone who simply made a choice and moved on. I see someone who has been carrying far more than most people realize for a very long time. And what's striking is that they never really talked about it. They handled everything in their own way. Quietly, privately, alone. The Ten of Wands card always brings me the image of someone trying to keep everything from falling apart. Like they're carrying far too many boxes in their arms, so many that they can barely see the road ahead. And yet, whenever someone asks if they're okay, the answer is always the same: I'm fine. And honestly, I feel like this person has that tendency. For some of you, this pressure may be connected to work, responsibilities, expectations, goals that need to be reached, bills that need to be paid, people depending on them in one way or another. For some of you, it may even go deeper than that. It could involve family. Maybe they're the person everyone turns to when something goes wrong, the one who steps in, the one who carries the weight, the one who's expected to stay strong. But what very few people realize is that the people who always appear strong are often the most exhausted, because they rarely allow themselves to fall apart. I keep seeing the image of someone sitting in their car after a long day. The engine is off, everything is quiet, but they still haven't gotten out. They just sit there for a few extra minutes, looking straight ahead, doing nothing, almost as if they're gathering enough energy to step into the next role their life requires of them. What's interesting here is, I don't actually feel like this person intentionally created distance from Capricorn. It feels more like they were trying to survive the pressure they were carrying. And sometimes, when someone is doing everything they can to keep their world from collapsing, they start pulling away from the places that make them feel most vulnerable. Not because those places don't matter, but because they matter so much that they're afraid they won't be able to show up the way they want to. That's why the Eight of Pentacles card carries such a specific feeling here. I don't see laziness. I don't see indifference. I see someone constantly working, constantly fixing, constantly trying to build something, but doing it all behind closed doors. Maybe Capricorn has asked questions like, why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they explain? Why didn't they tell me what was going on? And honestly, I think part of the answer is that they didn't want anyone to see the chaos they were carrying inside. For some people, admitting they're struggling feels even scarier than the struggle itself. They want to show up when everything is already figured out, when everything is stable, when they finally have the answers. But life rarely works that way. And that's what brings me to the King of Pentacles card. Wow, this is the card that made me pause the longest. Because the energy here isn't really about money. It's not about status. It's not even about outward success. It's about worth. I keep hearing the same sentence: I'm not enough. And Capricorn, I don't think that's your voice. I think it's theirs. Maybe they've never said it out loud. Maybe they've never admitted it to another soul. But deep down, it feels like there's a part of them that constantly worries they're not enough, not stable enough, not successful enough, not prepared enough, not capable of giving someone what they truly deserve. And when a person carries that belief for long enough, they begin viewing everything through a lens of lack, even when others see their value, even when opportunities are standing right in front of them, even when love is present. They focus on what they don't have instead of what they do. For some of you, this may be the kind of person who believes they need to solve every problem before allowing themselves to be happy. But the challenge is that life always creates new problems, which means the day they finally feel completely ready never seems to arrive. And honestly, I think that's the real battle happening here. Not a battle with Capricorn, not a battle with circumstances, but a battle with the impossible standards they've placed on themselves. A battle that very few people may even know exists, because from the outside they still look composed, still look capable, still look like they have everything under control. But the deeper I go into this energy, the more I feel that beneath that calm exterior, there are still so many things left unsaid. And somehow, those unspoken things seem to be holding an important piece of this entire story. I think there's something very special coming through here. This person isn't just remembering what happened anymore. They're starting to remember how it felt. And if you've ever experienced a connection that truly mattered in your life, then you probably understand just how different those two things are. Because the truth is, people forget details all the time. We forget dates. We forget exact words. We forget how certain events unfolded. But feelings are different. Feelings tend to stay. And honestly, I feel like that's exactly where this energy is leading. The Six of Cups card always gives me the feeling of memories that don't knock before they enter. They simply arrive, unexpectedly, in the most ordinary moments. I keep seeing someone doing something completely normal. Maybe they're driving. Maybe they're grabbing a coffee. Maybe they're putting things away around the house. And then suddenly, a memory appears. Not a memory of an argument, not a major life event, just a very small moment. A conversation, a smile, a look, a sentence that didn't seem important at the time, yet somehow it stayed. For some of you, I feel like this person is remembering the peaceful moments the most. And what's interesting is that sometimes we don't recognize the value of peace until it's no longer there. Because peace doesn't make a lot of noise. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't create the rush that intense emotions often do. But when it's gone, you realize how rare it really was. And I feel like Capricorn may have brought that feeling into this person's life. Not necessarily perfection. Not necessarily a relationship where everything was easy, but a feeling of being able to be themselves. A feeling of not needing to prove anything. A feeling of being able to breathe, to let their guard down. And now, looking back, they're beginning to realize that's not something you find everywhere. What's interesting here is, I don't think they're only remembering Capricorn. I think they're beginning to compare experiences, not consciously, not in the sense of sitting down and making a list, but in the natural way the mind compares things without even trying. When they meet someone new, when they enter a new chapter, when they experience something different, part of them seems to drift back toward old memories. And the questions that arise aren't necessarily, why did everything change? Instead, they sound more like, what if I had understood it better back then? What if I had said what needed to be said? What if I hadn't let fear make the decisions? And honestly, I think that's why the Lover's card carries such a deep energy here. Not because it's about choosing between two people, not because it's about a simple decision, but because it's about recognizing the value of a connection. Some connections enter our lives and leave, and eventually we keep moving forward. But some connections change the way we see ourselves. They teach us what we truly need, what we truly appreciate, what we once thought was ordinary but later realized was incredibly rare. And I feel like this person is sitting in that realization, not all the time, not every single day. But whenever their mind goes there, the emotions feel very clear, very real, very difficult to ignore. The Four of Cups card brings a quiet sense of regret. Not necessarily regret about whether something ended or didn't end, but regret about what wasn't fully seen when it was right there. It's almost like they're looking at an old painting, and only now noticing where the most important details were hidden. For some of you, this person may have been so focused on everything happening around them, the pressures, the problems, the goals, the responsibilities, that they failed to recognize what was standing right in front of them. And now, as life slows down a little or as they have more time to reflect, those empty spaces are gradually being filled with understanding. I also feel something deeply human here, because sometimes missing someone doesn't show up as pain. Sometimes it shows up as gratitude. Gratitude for having met someone. Gratitude for having shared beautiful moments. Gratitude for someone leaving a lasting imprint on your life, even if you didn't fully understand it at the time. And honestly, I think this is where the emotions begin to deepen. Because when a memory stops being just a memory and starts carrying meaning, people often begin looking at the entire journey through a completely different lens. I think what's changing here has very little to do with this person's external circumstances. It feels like it's happening in the way they're beginning to see themselves. And honestly, that's often the hardest kind of change to notice. Because when someone changes jobs, moves to a new place, or completely reshapes their life, everyone can see it. But when someone changes from the inside out, sometimes nobody notices, except them. And I feel like that's exactly the energy the Star card brings through here. Not perfection, not a life without problems, but the feeling of finally seeing a light at the end of a very long chapter. Maybe this person spent years trying to be strong, years trying to prove themselves, years putting responsibility ahead of emotion. And what's interesting is that when someone does that for long enough, they can forget how to listen to their own heart. They know how to get things done. They know how to solve problems. They know how to keep moving forward. But somewhere along the way, they stop being sure of what they actually feel. For some of you, this person may have believed that emotions were something to control, something to organize, something to set aside while focusing on more practical matters. But the older they get, the more they're realizing that emotions don't disappear just because we ignore them. They simply wait. They stay there quietly until we're finally ready to face them. And honestly, I feel like that's what's happening now. Not quickly, not dramatically. Not the kind of change where someone wakes up one morning and suddenly becomes a different person. It's happening layer by layer, little by little, almost like someone revisiting old chapters of their life with entirely new eyes. There's something really beautiful about the Queen of Cups card showing up here. Because for the first time in this reading, I don't feel like this person is running from their feelings anymore. They're sitting with them, listening to them, observing them, and in many ways that can be harder than staying busy. I keep seeing someone sitting alone with a cup of coffee that's gone cold. No music playing, no phone in their hand. Just sitting there, thinking. Not about tasks, not about responsibilities, but about what they've actually felt. About emotions they've never fully allowed themselves to feel before. What's interesting here is, I don't think this is only about Capricorn. I think Capricorn may be part of this emotional awakening. But the transformation happening here feels much bigger than one connection. Because when someone starts healing, they don't just re-examine a relationship. They begin re-examining the way they love, the way they trust, the way they give and receive affection. And that's when the bigger questions start showing up. Why do I always keep people at a distance? Why am I so afraid of getting hurt? Why do I always feel the need to control everything? Why do I still feel like I'm not enough, even after trying so hard? I feel like this person is beginning to have conversations like that with themselves. Maybe not every day, but more often and more honestly. The Temperance card comes through like a very gentle reminder that real growth doesn't happen because we force ourselves to change. It happens when we finally allow the different parts of ourselves to sit at the same table. The part that wants to be loved, the part that's afraid of being hurt, the part that wants to move forward, the part that's still carrying old memories. For a long time, those parts may have been fighting each other. But now, it feels like they're beginning to understand one another. There's a softness in this energy. More compassion. More understanding, especially toward themselves. For some of you, this person has spent years criticizing themselves, believing they needed to be better, more successful, more stable, stronger, more prepared. But now they're starting to realize that healing isn't about becoming an entirely different person. It's about learning how to accept who you already are. Including the imperfect parts, including the mistakes, including the things you once wanted to forget. And I think that's why the energy feels so much calmer here. There's less resistance, less running, less fighting against themselves. Just someone slowly beginning to understand themselves more deeply, slowly beginning to forgive themselves. And when that starts happening, the way they view love begins to change as well. Because sometimes the first thing that needs healing isn't a relationship. It's the way we see our own worth. And honestly, I feel like this person is standing very close to that realization. A realization that may cause them to look back at many parts of their life through an entirely different lens. I feel like there's a moment happening inside this person right now. Not a dramatic moment that everyone around them can see. Not the kind of change that makes the world stop and pay attention. Something much quieter than that. Much more private. It's the moment when someone finally stops arguing with the truth. Because honestly, I feel like for a long time, they tried to explain everything away. They tried to rationalize it. Tried to convince themselves. Tried to find reasons that would make the weight easier to carry. But the older they get, the more they reflect, the less those explanations seem to work. The Five of Cups card always makes me think about what happens when someone finally sits down with their own choices. No noise, no distractions, no endless list of things to do, just honest thoughts. And I feel like this person is beginning to look back at certain decisions from a very different perspective. What's interesting is, I don't actually see someone drowning in self-blame. I see someone facing the truth. And those are very different experiences. Self-blame tends to keep people stuck. Truth creates movement. Truth creates awareness. Truth creates growth. And sometimes, truth creates the desire to do better. For some of you, this person genuinely believed they had valid reasons for the choices they made. And maybe they did. Pressure, responsibility, fear, old wounds, all of those things were real. But I think they're beginning to understand that knowing why we did something doesn't automatically erase its consequences. And honestly, that's a very mature lesson, because there are moments in life when we're not bad people. We're simply people trying to manage pain in ways we haven't fully outgrown yet. Then years later, we look back and realize some of those choices created distance between us and the things that truly mattered. What's interesting here is, I don't think what weighs on this person the most is what they lost. I think it's what they failed to see while it was still there. I keep seeing someone walking past a beautiful view every single day, so familiar that they stop noticing it. Then one day it's gone, and only then do they realize how much it had been giving them all along. That's what this energy feels like. This isn't awareness born from lack, it's awareness born from value. And once someone truly understands the value of something, it becomes much harder to keep justifying old decisions. The Judgment card comes through again here, and wow, it really feels like a season of honesty. Not honesty with other people first, honesty with themselves. Questions are starting to surface that they may not have been ready to answer before. Did I really try? Did I truly open my heart? Did I give fear too much power over my life? Did I allow temporary problems to overshadow something that had long-term meaning? These aren't easy questions. Not at all. But I feel like they're beginning to sit with them, little by little, one layer at a time. And what I genuinely like about this energy is that it no longer feels like avoidance. It feels like awakening. Someone beginning to understand that maturity isn't about always being right. It's about being brave enough to recognize where you were wrong. The Seven of Pentacles card carries a powerful feeling here, because I don't think they're only reevaluating this connection. I think they're reevaluating their entire journey. The way they've invested their time, the way they've invested their emotions, the way they've built their life. I keep seeing someone standing in the middle of a garden they've spent years tending, and quietly asking themselves, what seeds did I plant? What did I neglect? What received too much of my energy? And sometimes the answers aren't comfortable, but they're necessary, very necessary. For some of you, what's changing isn't this person's circumstances. It's their motivation. For a long time, fear may have been driving the car. Fear of failure, fear of being hurt, fear of losing control. But now I feel a different force slowly growing stronger. A desire to live more honestly with what they truly feel. A desire to stop repeating the same cycles. A desire to become someone they themselves can respect when they look back on their life. And honestly, I feel like this is where the story begins reaching a deeper layer. Because after someone becomes honest enough to see their regrets, they often begin seeing truths about themselves that they were never ready to face before. I honestly feel like what we're looking at here is no longer just a story about what happened. It's becoming a story about someone finally seeing themselves more clearly. And if I'm being honest, that's often one of the most difficult parts of growing up, because a lot of people can face challenges. They can face pressure, they can face loss, but not everyone is willing to face the truth about themselves. There's a very powerful image coming through here. Almost like someone standing in front of a mirror after years of only glancing at their reflection. And for the first time, they actually stop. Not to judge themselves, not to criticize themselves, just to look. Really look. The Hierophant card comes through with the feeling that this person is re-examining many of the beliefs they've carried for years. Beliefs about love, beliefs about strength, beliefs about how a person should live, how a person should feel, how a person should behave. For some of you, this may be someone who grew up believing emotions needed to be controlled. That getting hurt was a sign of weakness. That if they stayed strong enough, independent enough, self-sufficient enough, they would never be disappointed. But life has a very interesting way of challenging beliefs like that, because sometimes the experiences that help us grow the most aren't the things we control. They're the things that teach us we can't control everything. What's interesting here is, I don't actually feel like this person is losing faith. I feel like they're changing what they believe. And those are two very different things. Some beliefs helped them survive a certain chapter of life. Some beliefs protected them. Some beliefs even served a purpose. But now those same beliefs don't seem to fit anymore. It's almost like wearing a jacket that's become too small. It used to fit. It used to be necessary. It used to offer protection. But now it no longer reflects the person they're becoming. And that's why the Devil Reversed card feels so significant here. Because I don't see a sudden breakthrough. I don't see chains falling away overnight. What I see is something much quieter. One knot loosening at a time. One layer peeling away at a time. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's old stories they've been telling themselves for years. Stories like, I don't need anyone. I have to handle everything myself. I can't let people see my weaknesses. I'm not allowed to make mistakes. And honestly, it feels like those stories are beginning to be questioned. Because when an old belief starts losing its grip, it usually feels uncomfortable at first. Very uncomfortable. Because it forces us to consider the possibility that we've been living inside a pattern that no longer serves us. For some of you, this person seems to be going through a deeply introspective phase, sharing less, looking outward less, and listening inward more. They may not talk about it. The people around them may not even realize it's happening. But I feel like there's a tremendous amount of reflection taking place, a lot of internal rearranging, a lot of perspective shifting. And then we arrive at the Eight of Cups card. And wow, this card feels different here. Because I don't see someone walking away from another person. I see someone walking away from an older version of themselves. A version that believed avoidance was easier than honesty. A version that thought silence could solve everything. A version that kept distance between itself and genuine emotion. I keep seeing someone standing in front of an old house, a place that once felt familiar, a place they returned to every day, But now they know they can't keep living there. Not because the house is bad, but because they've changed. And when a person changes, the old spaces inside them begin changing too. There's something very mature about this energy. Less resistance, less justification, less blame. Just someone gradually accepting responsibility for their own journey. And honestly, I think that's why everything feels quieter now. Not because they suddenly have all the answers, but because they're no longer running from the questions. And sometimes, that's the first real sign that an old chapter is finally beginning to close. Because when someone becomes brave enough to look directly at the truth, they often start realizing there are even deeper things inside themselves, still waiting to be healed and understood. I think something is changing very noticeably here. And it's this: silence isn't working the way it used to. For a long time, this person may have treated silence like a shelter, a place to postpone things, a place to avoid complicated emotions, a place where they didn't have to explain things they barely understood themselves. But the older they get, the more they seem to realize that some questions don't disappear just because we stop talking about them. And some feelings don't disappear simply because we bury them beneath work, responsibility, or time. And honestly, I feel like this is where the energy keeps lingering. The Page of Cups card always makes me think of emotions that haven't fully taken shape yet. Like a letter that's been written over and over again but never mailed. Like a text message that's typed, then deleted, typed again, deleted again, and then typed one more time. For some of you, I feel like this person has had countless conversations in their head that Capricorn never heard. They've imagined what they would say, how they would explain things, what they would finally admit. But when the moment came to truly open up, they stepped back, not because they didn't want to speak, but because part of them was still afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being rejected, afraid that the words might arrive too late. I keep seeing the image of someone waking up very early in the morning. The city isn't fully awake yet, everything is quiet. And that's when the most honest thoughts tend to arrive. No noise. No distractions. Just the things they've been trying not to think about for a very long time. What's interesting here is, I don't think what haunts them most is what happened. I think it's what never happened. The conversations that never took place. The questions that were never asked. The explanations that were never spoken. The apologies that were never sent. And sometimes people struggle more with unfinished stories than completed ones. Because when something truly ends, at least we know where it ended. But when something remains unresolved, the mind keeps returning to it, keeps searching, keeps wondering. Could things have been different? Could I have handled it better? Did I let fear lead for too long? The Knight of Cups card brings through the feeling of someone becoming more honest with their emotions. Not in an impulsive way, not in a romanticized way, but in a more mature way. It feels like they're beginning to understand that emotions aren't something to conquer. They're not something to completely control. They're something to listen to. And wow, that's a very different perspective from where they once were. For some of you, this person may have believed that if they waited long enough, their feelings would simply disappear. But what happened seems to be the opposite. Time didn't make things smaller. Time made things clearer, especially the things that truly mattered. I feel like they're revisiting moments they once dismissed too quickly. Conversations they once considered ordinary. Emotions they tried to explain away with logic. And now, all of those things seem to carry a different meaning. The Ace of Swords card appears here with the feeling that a truth is becoming harder and harder to ignore. Not necessarily a truth about Capricorn, a truth about themselves. A truth that says they're tired of telling themselves the same old stories. Tired of pretending certain things didn't matter. Tired of finding excuses for things they've understood deep down for a very long time. Something is becoming clearer. Almost like watching fog slowly lift from a landscape. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough to finally see the road ahead. And there's something very gentle about this energy. Because growth isn't always about huge transformations. Sometimes growth is simply being honest enough to say, I didn't handle that as well as I could have. I didn't say what needed to be said. I allowed fear to make decisions for me. And honestly, that takes a tremendous amount of courage. Far more than most people realize. Because not everyone is willing to look at the imperfect parts of themselves. But I feel like this person is beginning to do exactly that. Little by little, layer by layer. And as those layers of protection slowly fall away, the emotions underneath are becoming easier to see. What's interesting is, I still feel there's an even deeper layer beneath all of these thoughts, beneath the memories, beneath the things left unsaid, a deeper emotional question. one that seems to revolve around who this person truly wants to become from this point forward. I think what's changing here isn't the feelings themselves. The feelings have been there for a long time. What's changing is the hesitation, and honestly, those are two very different things. Because sometimes a person can know exactly how they feel for months, even years. But understanding your feelings and being ready to do something with those feelings are completely different journeys. The energy here feels like someone who's been standing at a crossroads for a very long time. Not because they couldn't see the options, not because they didn't know what they wanted, but because they kept waiting for the perfect moment. A moment when everything would be clear, a moment when there would be no risk, a moment when they could be absolutely certain they wouldn't make a mistake. But what's interesting is, life rarely gives us that. And I feel like this person is finally beginning to understand that. The Temperance card comes through with such a calm energy. The chaos that appeared in the earlier parts of this reading feels much quieter now. There's less of that feeling of being pulled between the past and the present. Something more balanced is beginning to take shape. Almost like someone has finally stopped fighting themselves. For some of you, this person may have spent a great deal of time searching for answers, trying to understand everything, trying to reach certainty, trying to eliminate every doubt. But now it feels like they're beginning to accept that not every question needs an immediate answer. Not every fear needs to disappear before we take a step forward. And honestly, that's a very different kind of maturity. No longer demanding perfection. No longer waiting until everything feels 100% certain. Simply learning how to move forward while some things remain unknown. What's interesting here is, I feel like they're looking at the future through a completely different lens now. There may have been a time when the future looked like a checklist, goals to achieve, things to control, things to accomplish, things to manage. But now another question seems to be emerging, a more emotional question, a question about meaning, a question about what truly matters. And that's where the Ace of Pentacles card appears. This card makes me think of a doorway, not a doorway that's already wide open, just slightly open, just enough to see that something different exists on the other side, something new. Something they may never have considered in quite this way before. And honestly, I don't see urgency here. Quite the opposite. This feels slow, thoughtful, grounded, mature. Like someone quietly asking themselves, what if fear no longer gets to make my decisions? What if I stop viewing life through the same old limitations? What if I allow myself to trust just a little more? For some of you, this person may have once believed that the future was built through control. But now they're beginning to realize that the future is also built through choice. And every choice reflects the person we're becoming. The Two of Wands card carries the feeling of looking toward the horizon, not action, not results, awareness. An awareness that there are still possibilities ahead. An awareness that they are no longer trapped inside the same cycles. An awareness that another path exists if they're willing to take it. I keep seeing someone standing beside a window early in the morning. The city is slowly waking up. The light is beginning to change. Everything looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. But something inside them feels different. Not because the world changed, because their perspective changed. And sometimes, that's where every new journey truly begins. Not with a dramatic event. Not with a life-altering moment, but with a quiet decision made deep inside. A decision that says, I don't want to keep living as the old version of myself anymore. And honestly, I think that's the most beautiful part of this entire energy. Not that everything has been resolved. Not that every question suddenly has an answer. But that this person seems more willing to look forward than backward. There's a very different kind of peace here. A peace that comes from understanding what the past was trying to teach. Understanding that mistakes don't necessarily have to become life sentences. Understanding that growth sometimes means carrying the lesson without carrying the burden. And I feel like once the energy reaches this point, the story stops being about what was lost. It begins becoming a story about who they're becoming, a version of themselves that's more honest, more open, softer in certain ways, and perhaps much braver than they used to be.